Hey there! This is our very last video for Business 101, and this is intended as a brief review for the final exam that will be coming up on Monday, just to let you know some of the material that you really should make sure you've studied well and are ready to respond to, because these certainly will be on the final exam. So again, final exam covers primarily modules 11, 12, and 13, and a few stray questions from previous material. We mentioned that in the class meetings, but I just wanted to mention that here as well before we dive into topic by topic things that you will need to have under your fingertips for the final exam. Alrighty, so here we go. Module 11, as you remember, has to do with information technology, and so some things from Module 11 that you will definitely need to have under your belt. You'll need to be familiar with both the threats and security measures that we currently use in information technology. So there's a few questions about different forms of malware, viruses, Trojan, spam, worms, those kinds of things, as well as some questions about IT security. There's also some questions regarding privacy. What is a management information system versus a decision support system, as well as a question comes back from sort of quiz content about what's an extranet versus an intranet, those kinds of things, right? Now, one of the things for sure you should focus on for Module 11, I've given you sort of extra textbook content regarding best practices for IT security. And you may remember we talk about in that video micro lecture that there are what I call the big five of corporate IT security. And you should take a good look at those and note that of those big five security measures, two of them focus on human beings, not so much on the technology, but on employees and employee behavior. So you ought to think hard about why that is the case and why is that important. All right, so be able to respond to that. That's Module 11. Module 12 is on accounting, as you remember, and Module 12 has a fair number of questions, so you should make sure you're up to date, up to speed with the chapter on accounting. What are some of the questions you'll run into? You will need to have a working definition, the textbook's working definition of accounting, and how that's different, for instance, than bookkeeping, right? What is accounting? Why do we have it? What are generally accepted accounting principles, and why is that important? What's the accounting equation? And how do assets, liabilities, and shareholders' equity or stockholders' equity, how do they relate to one another? You will need to have at your fingertips some discussion on the ratio analysis stuff, right? And so remember, we talked about different types of ratios, liquidity ratios, solvency ratios, right? You should take a look at that in the textbook as well. There is at least a question or two regarding the different categories of accounting that are out there, as well as what is the contours and elements of Sarbanes-Oxley, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Why is that important? What else here? There's a couple of questions on financial statements, so you should be familiar with the different types of major financial statements, right? What's the difference between a balance sheet, an income statement, and the statement of cash flows? There's discussions on each of those. Let's see. What's an audit? What's net income, and why is that important? What's the equation for working capital? What's working capital? Why is that important? And a couple things you really should have under your belt from the module on accounting. What do we mean when we say that in accounting, numbers are stories in disguise? And what really does the accounting equation represent? Most of you by now should be able to rehearse, and write down what is the accounting equation, but what does that really represent? There is a discussion in the textbook as well as in the video micro lectures. So beyond just being able to write down the accounting equation for us, you should be able to discuss a little bit about what that really represents. Let's see. I think that's the big stuff out of Module 12. You can tell there's a lot of stuff there. That's probably the module with the most amount of questions on this final exam. On Module 13, you remember that is the last module we just dealt with on finance. And so you will need to be able to answer and respond to what is the purpose and goal of finance, and at its best, what does the financial system give to us? What is the purpose of the financial system? And then you'll need to be able to discuss the difference between debt and equity financing, right? And you remember a company can go out and get the capital it needs either by selling stock, so you should be able to discuss that. You should know what an IPO is in that realm, right? You should know how what is the body, the SEC, that regulates public corporations. You should be able to discuss what's the difference between debt financing and equity financing. All of this, of course, driven by things like compound growth, time value of money. You should be able to respond to questions about that, as well as what is the balance between risk and return? What's the relationship of risk and return? Now, when we talk about debt financing, you should be able to recognize what is a bond, what's the difference between a corporate bond and a municipal bond, and what does it mean when a bond is in default, right? You should be able to recognize this whole concept of what does it mean that the finance department serves as the parent in the room. You had a whole video micro lecture on that very topic, right? That's really the big stuff, I think, from Module 13 you will need to know. Now, there's going to be some questions, as I mentioned, just a small number from previous chapters. There's stuff on producing goods versus producing services, and what's the distinctions between those two things. And then with regards to leadership, what is leadership? What are different types and forms of leadership? What is leadership trying to accomplish? Why do we need leaders and leadership in organizations? That's really the big stuff, right? Again, the short answer type questions are really going to focus on, as I mentioned before, the forms of IT security which focus on people, on employees, on the accounting equation, and there's another, what's debt and equity financing, what's the difference, you should be able to discuss that, as well as what does it mean that accounting represents numbers as stories in disguise. All right, so that's really a very brief preview of what you're going to see on the final exam in just a couple of days. Hope this is helpful for you. I'm going to publish this up today as soon as I can edit it and get this thing ready to rock and roll. So hopefully this will give you enough ammunition to study for the exam and know precisely what we're going to be asking you so that you can hit a home run on that thing. Alrighty? So again, thanks so much for your time in this class this semester, and I hope that each one of you does just a phenomenal job on the final exam, and of course in the rest of your education and your future career as well. Alrighty, it's been really wonderful having you in the class. Thanks so much. Hope this review was helpful.